Voting by mail is wrought with fraud and abuse. In the case of Nevada, where they want to send out thousands and thousands of ballots, and then they're going to send them back. Who knows who signed the ballot?
Yeah, I've done some deep dive in it. There really is no record of massive fraud or even serious fraud from mail-in voting. It's being carried out in Republican states. It's being carried out in Democratic states. There's no indication that mail-in voting as opposed to in-person voting tends to favor one party over another. If anything, it tends to favor Republicans because the people, now we're talking about outside a pandemic, who historically have tended to vote most often by mail are elderly people, people over 65, and they tend to vote more Republican than Democratic. So, have there been some cases? Yes. And there's an issue sometimes with what's called vote harvesting, where instead of mailing in your ballot, that you'll get people who will go into a community and vacuum up, collect all the ballots, say they're going to take them in. And then the danger, of course, is that they will discard the ballots from neighborhoods that they think are going to vote for the other party. We've seen that in North Carolina. There was a big case involving a Republican who did that, and it helped a Republican win the election. It was so serious they had to have a new election. It's happened sometimes in California. But when people get their ballots and mail them in themselves, no history of fraud at all.
If you thought Trump was already fed up with Fox News because the network refused to rig its latest polling that shows Joe Biden with a commanding lead over him for president, this latest debunking by Chris Wallace isn't going to do much to smooth the relationship over. This is the Fox host refuting Trump's attack on Michigan and Nevada. The president had taken to Twitter and written, quote, "State of Nevada thinks that they can send out illegal vote-by-mail ballots, creating a great voter fraud scenario for the state and the U.S. They can't. If they do, I think I can hold up funds to the state. Sorry, but you must not cheat in elections." He followed up with, quote, "Michigan sends absentee ballot applications to 7.7 million people ahead of primaries in the general election. This was done illegally and without authorization by a rogue Secretary of State. I will ask to hold up funding to Michigan if they want to go down this voter fraud path." Now, before I say anything else, let me just say unequivocally that there is nothing illegal about having absentee ballot applications mailed to people who could then fill out those to request an absentee ballot, which are perfectly legal in battleground states like Michigan and Nevada, just like doing so is legal in Republican states like Georgia, Iowa, Nebraska, and West Virginia. And yet not a peep about those states by Trump. I wonder why. And by the way, this is all made even more necessary given the minor detail that we're in the middle of a global pandemic. The idea that the President of the United States is undermining legal voting practices is bad enough, but basically demanding that voters go to the polls in person while a deadly virus that has already killed nearly 100,000 Americans is sweeping across the country is just plain reckless. Keep in mind, when Wisconsin's Republican State Supreme Court mandated in-person voting a few weeks ago, 52 people who voted or worked the polls contracted coronavirus. That was a completely avoidable occurrence, and the only reason it happened is because the GOP was hell-bent on discouraging us from actually casting ballots. So instead, they'll lower the number of polling places and then force those in densely populated areas, which tend to vote Democratic, to show up anyway if they want to vote. They would rather risk your life than allow you to possibly vote for Democrats. But on the other side of the real-life dangers of voting during a pandemic are the very made-up dangers of voter fraud. Despite Republicans' 5-alarm fires, there is zero evidence that it even exists. Of course, that hasn't stopped Trump and the rest of the GOP from pretending that it does. That's why he created a voter fraud commission to try and justify his claim that there were 3 to 5 million undocumented immigrants voting in the 2016 election, which the commission couldn't find before being forced to disband. That's why he claimed that he only lost New Hampshire because out-of-staters drove in and cast ballots. That's why he said Republicans lost the 2018 midterms by claiming that after voting, some people would, quote, go to their car, put on a different hat, put on a different shirt, come in and vote again. There's no truth to any of it, but he says it to manipulate people on the right into thinking that it exists by virtue of repeating it so often. In reality, let's look at some examples. As for the supposed rampant voter fraud in Florida touted in 2018 by Trump and Rick Scott, the state of Florida officially wrapped up its investigation this week. The number of cases of voter fraud? 0. The same thing happened in Georgia. Brian Kemp made up a fraud scandal during the governor's race while he himself was suppressing the vote as Secretary of State, and then after the election, a nice little investigation found nothing at all. Take California, the biggest state in the nation, under full Democratic control, vote by mail, a fraudster's paradise, right? In 2016, investigators found 6 cases of possible fraud out of 23.1 million votes cast that were even worth sending to local district attorneys. 6 out of 23.1 million. Although I should mention that in recent memory, there has been one notable instance of fraud. It was perpetuated by a Republican operative to try and steal the election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. Funny how when Trump and Republicans are so busy insinuating that Democrats are cheating in elections, that the only actual instance of fraud was perpetuated by their own party. Instead of making up fake scandals, Trump would probably be better served focusing on reality, on coordinating a nationwide testing system and contact tracing and increasing production of PPE for the actual pandemic, instead of playing pretend with scandals that he's busy cooking up.